Today we're going to do the Montessori Stem lessons. We will do this grouping in 2 separate videos. The first video will include the function of the stem, 2 main types of stems, parts of a woody stem, and 2 kinds of tubes. The stem. Since the leaves need the sun in order to make their food, and since there is great competition on the ground for the sun, the stem has the job of taking those leaves straight up to find the light that it needs. Just as the roots have the command to grow down, the stem has the command to grow up. The stem has another job. Its second task is to carry the water that the roots have collected up to the leaves so that the leaves can make their food. So we set up this experiment yesterday. You can do this experiment at home with celery if you have leaves on the celery. And what you can see, we have our white lily with our regular water, and then we have a lily that had red water, and you can see that that flower has turned red. And what you see is that the stem actually carried the water up to the leaves. And in this case, you can see it clearly in the flower petals, but if you could see the leaf up close, the leaf itself is red. But if you do this with celery, you'll see that the celery's leaves turn red. Okay, and so you can see that the stem carried the water up to the leaves. Now, when we're talking about stems, there are 2 different kinds of stems. Okay, we're going to look at these plants. I have this plant here, and I have this plant here. So you can see that they are different. The plant that has the kind of stems that are succulent and green are called herbaceous. Herbaceous comes from the Latin word herba, meaning grass. Plants with herbaceous stems do not live a very long time. Now look at these stems. They are woody. They are called woody stems. Plants that have woody stems live for a very long time, and they can grow very, very tall. Now, you can go out in your environment, you can go on a walk, you can go outside, you can look around your house, and look for the 2 different kinds of stems: herbaceous stems and woody stems. Now the next lesson we're going to do is called parts of a woody stem. Now you can do all these lessons all together, or you can do each one separate on another day. Since the leaves need the water that has been absorbed by the roots to make the food, we know that the water is carried up by the stem in tubes within the stem. In order to protect those important tubes inside the stem, some plants have developed a protective layer or covering so insects can't get those tubes. That layer is called bark. So here we have a really good example of some bark that we found on our walk today. We have that one. And we have one that looks like this. Now, as the new tubes grow, the stem thickens. And in some plants, these tubes are arranged in rings. You can see the rings here. So we actually found a tree cutting, and you can see the rings. Now you can do this. There are lots of branches on the ground, and you can look at the end of a branch and you can see how old or how many rings there are. So every year the plant adds a new set of rings. If you count those rings, you can tell the age of the tree. As the tree grows, the old tubes in the center harden and die. The living part of the stem, or the new tubes, are found just inside of the bark. The innermost part of the tree hardens into wood and supports the tree. It happens to be very flexible, and so on windy days, a tree can bend without breaking. The outermost part of the stem is still alive. Sometimes you can see a tree where all the inner parts are gone, but the tree is still alive. You can also tell sometimes that the living part of the stem is just inside the bark because you find fungus growing on the bark. And we found a really cool example of fungus today, also on our walk. Now, if you see something like this, you can leave it there and just look at it. We took it off, but we're not going to touch it with our hands. That's why we have it in a bag. But this is a fungus that was growing on a tree. Okay. So wood, how we get wood, it's just really an accumulation of rings that harden. Now the last lesson we're going to talk about is the two kinds of tubes. So we've been talking about the tubes and the stem. Well, there are two kinds of tubes. One of the tubes carries the water from the ground to the leaves. The other set of tubes carries the food that is made by the leaves down to the other parts of the plant. The tubes that carry the food are called phloem. Phloem comes from the Greek word phlos, meaning bark. The phloem and the tubes that are the closest to the bark. They are the tubes. The tubes that carry the water back down are called xylem. The word xylem comes from the Greek word xulon, meaning wood. The xylem are the tubes innermost and closest to the wood. The xylem are protected by their innermost position. If the insects eat them, the plants cannot make any more food because it wouldn't have the water to do so. In between the xylem and the phloem, there's a sheath called the cambium. Cambium comes from the Latin word cambiare, meaning to exchange. It is the cambium that helps the plant to grow new tubes. So for our follow-up work, you can talk about the different types of plants. We have different types of stems. We have herbaceous stems and woody stems. You can talk about the parts of the tubes, the different kinds of tubes, and you can do that experiment with the celery leaves so you can see how the plant, how the stem actually carries the water up to the leaves.